Hi, I'm going to get started because it's time. This is Rethinking Drupal Configuration. Just in case you're in the wrong room, this is what we're talking about. My name is Scott Reinen. You can find me as Scott R on Twitter and sreynen on everywhere else. I don't know why I got a different name on Twitter, but I did. I work at Design Group. We are a Drupal shop in Denver, Colorado, and we do strategy, design, and development for cause-driven organizations. So we do a lot of nonprofit, education, government type work. If you're interested in learning more, you can check out our site, atten.io. If you've ever heard of me, it's probably from one of these two things. I maintain groups.drupal.org, which is one of the many places the Drupal community gets together online. And I also created and maintain the Font Your Face module, which is a font management tool for Drupal. That's surprisingly widely used, despite me not touching it much in the last year. And that's because for the last year I've been doing some different things. One is focusing on configuration and code and how that works in Drupal. And the other is becoming a parent, which I only mention because that significantly influences my thinking on how configuration should work in Drupal. Mainly that it should be a lot easier and faster so that I have more time to deal with a child. So I've been thinking about this stuff for about a year now and presenting on it for about 9 months now. And I have a lot of opinions that I'm going to share with you. I would hope after hearing about some of this stuff that you would have a lot of opinions of your own, or maybe you already do. I don't really care if you have the same opinions I do. I love to debate things. So if you hear stuff and think, that's dumb, then tell me that, and then we can talk about it. It'll be a fun conversation. Or if you have trouble coming up with opinions on how Drupal configuration should work, I've supplied a starter pack of opinions that you can just adopt if you want. The first one is what configuration is. And from my perspective, configuration isn't quite everything, but everything gradually becomes configuration. Anything new that we're doing in Drupal, we start it as kind of a custom one-off thing that we're doing for a specific project, and then we do it a few more times, and it's slightly different each time. And eventually we think, hey, we should build a system that lets us quickly decide which way we're going to do this, and those decisions get saved as configuration. And that happens everywhere in Drupal. Like, everything we do in Drupal starts as just a one-off solution, and it turns into a system that manages the decisions we're making about that kind of thing. So for example, the views module is, all that does is save a bunch of decisions about how a list of items should be displayed in Drupal. And there are 100 decisions, probably more than 100 decisions you can make in that process, and all of those decisions are just saved as configurations. If you just start off with writing your own queries and outputting directly, you don't need to save any of those decisions, but over time, the more of that you do, it's going to turn into configuration. So everything, even if it's not currently configuration, will be configuration at some point. The second opinion that I invite you to adopt is that configuration is not interface. And this is, I'll talk about this more later, but this is a big thing that I think we need to change our thinking on, especially as we move to Drupal 8. So a lot of the sessions you've been going to have probably shown you how to do something in Drupal by showing you the interface for doing that thing. But most modules in Drupal have a core module, and then they have a standalone UI module. And if you turn off that UI module, the configuration doesn't go away, which should be a pretty strong indicator that the configuration exists independent of the interface. And I'll get into this more later, but that's an important distinction to make, because if we keep thinking about configuration as directly tied to the interface we use to manage it, then we're going to miss out on a lot of the value of configuration. So last opinion in this configuration opinion starter pack is that interface is important, and I'll talk about all of these more later, but the key takeaway here is just that you have a lot to do, as do I would think we all do, and it's good. It's actually, in that context, laziness is a virtue. Like, you should be looking for opportunities to do less work, and good interface is how we do less work. If we can optimize our interfaces for how we work, then we can do more faster, and that's what we hope to get out of interface. So how does all of this relate to the specifics of how configuration works and how we think about it? I want to start by going back in time to how configuration used to work a long, long time ago, like I think 6 years ago. What I will call the dark ages, which is before the features module existed. We thought about configuration in Drupal significantly differently before everyone started using features. And how we thought about it was basically that, like I was saying before, the configuration basically was the browser UI. You wouldn't do anything in Drupal that you weren't doing in the browser. So if you wanted to create something, you would create it in the browser. If you wanted to look at how something was configured, you would look at that in the browser. If you wanted to update it, you would update it in the browser. And if you wanted to delete it, you would delete it in the browser. Those are the four big things we care about with configuration and everything, is create, read, update, and delete. That's only partially true. We would also do a lot of stuff in custom code that would directly interface with configuration, but the vast majority of the work we were doing was in the browser, dealing with configuration. And that was all great until we wanted to manage our configuration. And by manage, I mean you configure something on, hopefully you're not working on a production site. So you configure something on one environment and you want to move it to another environment. How do you do that? Or you configure something and then you want to go back to how it was configured before because you messed something up. How do you do that? That's all what I'm grouping under management. And this wasn't much of an issue when you're like launching a new site. Like, you can do all of your configuration in the browser. It gets saved in the database along with the content that you're doing. You launch a site and you do that by just copying the whole database to the production environment. And that all works fine, but then you want to make a change and you test the change on your local, and you can't just take the database and put it on the production environment then, because other things have been happening on production. Like, people have been hopefully actually using the site and creating users and content, and you can't just wipe out the whole database. So we need some way to manage the configuration independently of everything else in the database, and that's what features does. So this was less important when Drupal was smaller, and like I said before, everything just gradually moves into configuration in the Drupal world, and this problem just got bigger and bigger, and then we introduced features. And if you haven't used features before, you should. If you're not managing your configuration, you should definitely do that, because this is kind of like stage 2 in what I hope is a multi-stage process in getting better at configuration. So features is great, and if you haven't used it before, it looks like this. Features gives you an interface with all of the configuration on your site, or almost all of it. Everything has to have custom integrations written for features, but pretty much everything is covered by features, and it gives you checkboxes for everything you want to, all of what I believe we're now calling configuration entities. It gives you a checkbox for all of those. So for each content type, you have a checkbox and say, yes, I want to manage this content type in a feature. And then what it does is spit out all of that configuration in PHP code in a module. And all you have to do is enable that module, and that PHP code runs in some way, and all of that configuration is on the other site. So if you want to, like in the scenario before where we launch a site and then we want to make updates to it after we launch it, we can test those updates on our local testing environment and re-export the feature with the updates and then push that over to the production environment and update that feature on the production environment. And ideally, everything will just work smoothly. As I'll get into in a moment, that doesn't always happen. But at least your configuration can be version controlled, and you're not doing full database syncs every time you make a change. So that takes our management from frowny face to smiley face. That's great. And I think for a lot of the Drupal community, that's the end. Everything's awesome now. Everyone uses features. We don't need to do anything else, right? I don't agree with that, obviously, or this would be a very short session. So I think where features fall short in a few places. And just in this chart, if we go back to the create, read, update, delete, one thing you can't do with features is delete configuration. So that gets a frowny face. It's also the way features exports configuration as PHP code leads to a lot of complications in updating things, because that PHP code depends on certain factor. I don't want to go into too much detail, but that configuration, that PHP code assumes that it's working against specific modules, and if those modules get updated out of sync with the features, there's just a lot of ways to make features fail. If you're doing it right, then it'll always work, but it's really easy to make features break. So updating, I'm going to downgrade that to kind of I believe the icon for this is called meh, like M-E-H. So a neutral face. It's not the worst thing, but it's not as good as it could be. There are some other things in features that are not good enough. Features is good, but I think we can do better. And one thing that is not one thing that kind of holds back features is that it assumes you're creating all of your configuration in the browser interface. So, well, it doesn't necessarily assume that, but it adopts the same kind of mindset that you create your configuration and then you export it to code. It doesn't it doesn't work if you're starting in code, and so it inherits all of the downsides of the browser UI, which, as we talked about before, are big and growing because everything gradually becomes configuration. And I want to get into a little more detail on the differences between the configuration and the interface, because you can only export things with features that you can create in the first place, and for most of us, we're only creating those things in the interface. So I want to go through a little scenario here that I enjoy asking people about, and it's donut ordering. And so if you go and get donuts for your organization, you're probably going to order them in dozens. And when you say, I want a dozen donuts at a donut shop, such as the Dunkin' Donuts downstairs, they will ask you what types of donuts you want. So if we're doing this on a Drupal site, we want a donut type field that has 12 values. And I think people who regularly work with fields in Drupal, when I ask them about this, most of them get a picture in their head of how they're going to do this. How many of you have that picture in your head right now of how you would create a field that has 12 donut types? Okay, you're all wrong. Because this is probably what you were picturing. You were going to go to this cardinality field and drag it down to 12, right? But there's no 12 there. The options you have there are 1 through 10 and unlimited. There's no way in the interface to set a field with 12 values. But the thing is, if you go into the configuration and directly set it to 12 values, it'll work. You'll have 12 fields. You just can't do that from the interface. The interface is limited, but the configuration is not. And that's one way that like an interface limits what you can do with configuration. But the other way is we don't create configuration for things that don't have interfaces, when it's often very easy to do. I mentioned that I maintain the Find Your Face module, and one of the big things I missed on that was I didn't create any contextual options for where fonts are applied. You just turn on a font or you don't. And the reason I didn't do that is I didn't have an interface for it yet. But that was a bad decision on my part, because it would have been really easy to create the configuration for that before I had the interface. And now that I want to go back and do it, all of the configuration is already on people's systems. So if I go back and do the interface at this point. Anyway, this is a bit of a tangent, but the point is we limit our configuration options based on the limitations of the interface, and we should get away from that. So this leaves us with the browser UI doesn't actually let us do everything we would like to do with configuration. It lets us do most things, but not everything. So now we have even more frowny faces and not happy faces. So let's make this better. Drupal 8 is making this better, and I want to talk through how. The way configuration works in Drupal 8 is all configuration across all Drupal modules is stored in the same way. So each module doesn't decide how it's going to store configuration independently. There's a standard configuration system that everything uses. And that means that we can do something like export that configuration to a format that does not rely on any specific code. And that format so far is YAML. And this is what the interface for that looks like in Drupal. This is kind of like a feature that just has everything. This just exports all of your configuration. You also have the option to do it on an individual level, but what that does is export 100 YAML files that look like this, and these are the equivalent of the checkboxes in feature. There's one file for everything, and it has all of the configuration for that one thing. And inside those files, there's a very simple format that's just key value pairs. And YAML is really easy to read and really easy to write. I don't know if you can all see this, but if you want to set the name of a content type, you just do name : and then what you want to set the name to. There's a little bit more with like nesting, but the syntax is incredibly simple. And the structure of configuration in Drupal 8 is also incredibly simple, which gives us a great base to work up from. Like I said, you can also do things on an individual level, and this is what that looks like. You can't do what you do in features, which is bundle kind of a specific set of configuration together, and there will be a Drupal 8 version of features that maintains that functionality, but does it in the same way that Drupal core does with configuration. So we're done with exporting PHP code, which is kind of fragile, and now we're exporting just the configuration. The difference is the PHP code that we're running does not have a one-to-one correlation with the configuration we want. It ideally creates that configuration, but it's not the equivalent of that configuration. And these YAML files are the equivalent of the configuration. So you can edit configuration by editing the YAML files. It's a little bit more complicated than that, but basically when you're editing a YAML file, what you're editing is the equivalent of the configuration. So another smiley face for management. Things are looking good. Everything's awesome now? Not yet. We're getting there. So one thing you still can't do with this Drupal 8 configuration system, at least in the YAML version of it, is delete. We don't have an easy way to delete, and we still have to go back to code to do that, which is okay, but ideally we would be able to do everything we want to do in a system that works exactly how we want it to work. So Drupal 8 config is better, but it's not better enough. It needs to be better. And another problem with that, I don't want to say problem, but another shortcoming of the Drupal configuration system takes us back to my third starter pack opinion, which is that interface is really important. A lot of the configuration interfaces in Drupal 8 have improved, but we haven't really changed how we think about those configuration interfaces. And specifically what I want to talk about is why we're all using the same interfaces. So core interfaces are a hard problem to solve because they're built for the common use case. Everyone's using the same interface. And I think we should stop doing that. Everyone has a different way that they think about their Drupal site, a different approach to building Drupal sites, and that leads to different thinking about how we do configuration in Drupal. And we don't all need to be using the same interface. In fact, we're not even doing that now in Drupal 7, even with the complexity of how configuration is managed in Drupal 7, we don't even do that. And one easy example of that is how we do the very simple configuration step of enabling modules. This is the modules page. I think this is running a custom module, but this is the modules page in Drupal 7. And I didn't, for a long time, really stop and think about what this page is for. But if you just look at what's on this page, almost everything on the page is about finding the module. So you have a search option on the top and different search filters for finding the module. You have groups of modules on the left, which are about finding the module. And then once you get to the point where you're at the module, it gives you a bunch of information about the module to mostly confirm that you have the right module. And if you work with Drupal for a while, you already know what module you want. You don't need any of this. The only thing you need is that little tiny checkbox there. Like, you know exactly what module you want to enable, and you just need that checkbox to enable it. And as a result of this, a lot of Drupal developers never use this page. What we use instead is drush. And what we do with drush is say, drush enable, and then the name of the module, because we know what module we want to enable. So we just say drush enable and that module, and it's done. We do the one thing we want to do, and we don't have any other distractions, nothing else slowing us down. And that's a completely separate interface for the same activity. It's targeted at a different approach to that activity. It's targeted at someone who knows what module they want before they go there, but it's a different interface that we're already using. And drush gives us that different interface targeted at a different approach to modules than the typical use case, and it saves us a ton of time. If you use drush to enable your modules, and you have in the past used this, your process of enabling and disabling modules is way faster. And before drush existed, if you're anything like me, it didn't feel slow in the first place. Like, you just used it because that was the only interface you had. And I think a lot of us are in that boat now with a lot of interfaces in Drupal. They don't feel slow because we're used to them, and we use them for everything. And we're used to it, so there's not a learning curve anymore. We do it because it's what's there. But there's a lot of room for doing interfaces that are custom tailored to the way you actually want to work. Remove everything you don't need and only focus on the things you want to do. Which all sounds great in theory, but if you've ever tried developing a custom interface for another module, you probably think that's really difficult. You have to basically understand everything about the module before you can make a new interface for it. Or at least you did before we improved the way configuration is managed. Now that configuration is a standalone thing independent of the interface, you can edit configuration from a module without ever looking at that module. You don't need to know anything about how the module works. You can just look at how the configuration works. And it's, as I showed you before in the YAML files, the configuration is relatively easy to read. So if you can find in the configuration what you want to change, you can just change it now. You don't have to understand everything about how the module works, because at the end of the day, the only thing that matters is where the configuration ends up. So this is how this works at a code level with Drupal 8. You simply tell it what what type of configuration you want to edit, in this case, node type page, and then you tell it what you want to set on it. And you just set those key value pairs with set key value. And then you say save, and everything's good. This is great if you are a person who writes code. This is how I do configuration now. I don't open the browser at all. I just write this. I open the browser to confirm what I did actually worked, but I just write the code to do the configuration. But I work with people who don't write code, as I think a lot of us do, and this doesn't help them, except it makes it much easier for me to make better interfaces for them. This is also great for Drupal 8, but a lot of us are still using Drupal 7. So I said I've been working for the last year or so on config and code. More specifically, I've been working on a module named config and code. The short name is sync. And that does the same thing in Drupal 7. So we basically have all of the niceties of Drupal 8 and Drupal 7 already today. And we can start using them now and start thinking differently about how we do configuration. Sync kind of copies the Drupal 8 approach at the code level of configuration, and hopefully the goal is to make it a little simpler even. You don't have to know that node types are saved as node.type. You can just say content type, which is how everyone I know talks about node types. They call them content types. So it has more human names, and it also treats configuration objects as more intelligent, less just a place where you put things, and more things that know about themselves. So there's not just a field configuration object, there's a text field that knows what a text field should look like. So you don't have to tell it everything about a text field. You just say this is a text field, and you're done. And the content type object, you don't have to, if you know how fields configurations get saved, there's field storage, which is the general stuff about the field, and then there's field instances, which is the field applied to each entity type or entity bundle. You don't have to do any of that with sync. You just approach it the way I, at least, and I think a lot of people think about fields, which is add this field to this content type. So the content type object has an add field class, and you just pass that the field object, and you've added the field. Again, that's all great if you're writing code, but if you're not writing code, that doesn't help you that much. But I'll show you more on that in a second. So let's talk about views. I've been showing you very simple configurations. This is what a views YAML file looks like. And you probably can't read that because it's 8 pages long. This is a single view. It's I think this is like 500 lines of YAML. So it's all of the same simple key value pairs, but there's a whole bunch of key value pairs in a view, and you're probably going to have a hard time finding the one you want to edit. So the way sync does this is it just abstracts all of that away. And this is how you create a view in sync. If you want to add a block display, you have these helper functions like add block display. And it creates that configuration, that full complexity of configuration in the background, but you don't have to know how that works to use it. If you want to add a publish filter, you just say add filter published. So there's not yet a Drupal 8 version of sync, but my plans are to make one and build it on top of the Drupal 8 configuration API and make it a little more approachable for complex things like views. So again, great for me because I write code, but if you don't write code, how does that help you? How that helps you is it makes it easy for people who write code to make better interfaces for you, which I've done for my coworkers, and you if you want to use it. One of those interfaces is called sheet to module. And at Atten, the way we do content types and other configuration is our information architects come up with a plan of what our content type should look like and what fields they should have and which of those fields should be required. And we store all of this in a spreadsheet that I think we copied from Palantir a while ago. Did you guys do that?
Yes.
Cool. Thanks. So we've been, so we store all this in a spreadsheet, and then we pass that spreadsheet to the client and say, give us your feedback on it. And they say, oh, we need another field on this type, or this field needs to be long text, not short text. And then we update that in the spreadsheet, which is super fast to do. We just delete and type some new stuff way faster than it would be to make those changes on the fly in Drupal. Except now this also works in Drupal. And what Sheet to Module does is just take this spreadsheet. We added a little bit of machine readable information to it, but basically it just takes the spreadsheet we were already using for our client feedback cycle and turns it into a module that has all of the YAML configuration needed to create this. So our process now, instead of looking at this spreadsheet and clicking through the UI to create everything that is in this spreadsheet after it's been approved by a client, we just export it and we're done. Well, we export it, enable a module, and we're done. Sorry, I didn't want to make it sound too simple, but there's still a review process on this. It's a relatively new thing. So I think it's safe to say it's already cut out like 80% of our content type creation process, like the time it takes to do that. And I expect that's only going to go up over time. Like in theory, this should be like a 30-second process to get from that spreadsheet that, again, we were already doing that, so why not use it, to the actual configuration in Drupal. And once we do that, we're already talking about why don't we just have clients review the content types actually in Drupal, because now we can edit that as quickly as we can edit a spreadsheet. That's great if you use spreadsheets, but if you don't, I don't even use this, but I made this just to demo how easy it is to make your own interfaces. This is a module, it's a sandbox module called Fast Content Type UI. And what this does is allow you to create all your content types on one page. So with the normal Drupal UI, you have to add a new content type, go to a form, save the settings on that content type, go back, add another content type. But if you already know, like, you have 12 content types to add and you don't care about the specific settings of those, you just want to get them in there, you can now do this all on a single form. It also lets you see very quickly which content types have comments enabled, and you can change that setting. It doesn't do the enabled but read-only version of comments, because I never use that. I only use comments are on or comments are off. So it's just a checkbox. Again, this is you don't have to make a choice between these different ways of thinking about content type configuration or configuration in general. All of these can now happily coexist because there's a common standard for where how the configuration gets saved. So I can use this interface for editing these content types, and then I can go back to the standard interface and make more specific changes there as needed. I can have custom interfaces that serve different needs and different purposes for different people. So all of this is, I think I already told you where this is all heading, but let's just review. More and more of Drupal goes into configuration. Eventually, in the future, the entire universe will be configurable. Configuration is a thing that exists independently of the interface. An interface is where you spend all your time. So you should care about whether your interface is not custom tailored to the way you want to work. And all of that leads to kind of my conclusion, which is that the best way to manage configuration is rolling your own system. Like, you should manage configuration the way you think, not the way not the default way that the average person thinks, but the way you think. Like, your Drupal configuration workflow should match the way your brain works. And there are now I'm sure there are more. I don't know of all of them, but there are at least 5 different ways you can manage content types now. Between that fast content type thing, and you can do that sheet to module thing, you can do the default interface, you can edit YAML files directly, you can do it in PHP directly. I would like there to be like 1,000 different ways to manage content types and all other sorts of configuration. So I haven't yet built the new Views UI, but I have made the tools that you can use to build. I hear people complain about the Views UI all the time because it does everything you could possibly want to do with views, and most people don't want to do everything you could possibly want to do. Most people have a very specific subset of things they want to do with views, so make your own UI that does just those things. Now you have all the tools. So because you can make whatever you want now, or get someone else to make it if you're not a coder, I think rolling your own is the way we should be thinking about configuration going forward in Drupal. In Drupal 8, or if you use Sync, you can already start thinking this way in Drupal 7. And now I think everything is, in fact, awesome. And I'm happy to answer any questions, or I guess, and you should give feedback on joined in, or send me messages on Twitter. I'm Scott R. Thanks.
Are the slides online?
The slides are not online yet, but they will be. I'm going to give myself an hour to do that. They will be within the hour, and I'll post that on my Twitter, or you can find me. I'll be here the rest of the day. You can walk up and ask me where they are.
If you on the joined in page, we can put
Oh, I'll put them there. Great. Yes, black shirt person.
Yes, it is black shirt.
Sorry, I didn't mean to make you equivalent of your shirt. Interface is not a person.
For that sync configuration code, where do you execute that?
Wherever you want, but I typically do it in hook enable or hook update n. Is that enough of an answer for you? Yeah.
So as far as Drupal 8 plans for that, I mean, it seems like one of the problems with features is that it's not core. I mean, it's obviously the Drupal 8 system is going to be a whole lot better because it's completely different, but it's also going to be better because it's in core from start. As far as sync, have you thought about the ideas in sync pushing them for like 8.1 or 8.2 and 4? I mean, because it seems like if we have something that we can build multiple interfaces on, but it's not core as far as building content types and stuff like that.
I have thought about that, but only as like a vague fantasy.
Yeah.
I haven't talked to anyone about that. I don't do a lot of core contribution just because it's a lot more difficult. Like the keynote talked about yesterday, it's a lot more difficult than contrib. So I do almost all my work in contrib. But if anyone who does core stuff is interested in that, I'd love to talk about it.
As far as what you've seen from how you can create fields and stuff programmatically in Drupal 8, what would be left over that you'd like to do in sync?
The sort of the helper functions, like you shouldn't need to know what the full configuration object looks like to edit it. You should be able to do kind of quick things that match the way people think about configuration, not just, I mean, it's the same, it's the interface at the code level should also match the way you think, not the way things get stored. So like if you want to add a filter, you shouldn't need to know what a filter looks like in views. You should just be able to say, like, I want a publish filter. I only want publish nodes. That should be enough to get that configuration there. And I don't know, like, yeah, I don't know at like conceptual level whether that's really something core should be doing, because it's so like I'm building the thing that makes sense to me, and sync is like, I mean, it's all object oriented, so people can extend those objects and build the thing that makes sense to them if they want. But I don't know that core needs to decide what makes sense to all developers. But maybe it should, I don't know. Yes, Larry.
first point, yes, core should for a lot of those. A lot of those utility methods I think are totally fair game for core, maybe not all of them, but at least some. Question, in the Drupal 7 version, when you're editing things like views or content types and stuff like that, since obviously core doesn't use sync in Drupal 7, are you just fronting for whatever those legacy configuration tools are of the hood?
Yeah, totally. It's all like every configuration type has a class that I go through and take whatever wacky way a module does configuration and put it into a common interface so nobody else has to think about that. And I started this process thinking like, what would it look like if I didn't use features? And very quickly got to, it would look insane because every module handles configuration differently, and I would need to remember like this module does module name load whatever, this module does module name read whatever, this module doesn't have a way to read configuration, you just have to pull it out of the database. And I mean, I can do that once relatively easily, I can read code, but that's not a efficient workflow. So sync is just like abstracting all of that into something that looks more like Drupal 8.
So is it building on top of features exports? Or is it
No.
So it has its own integration of views?
No, it builds on top of like, I mean, I think views is like views save view. Internally it saves everything as an associative array that looks like Drupal 8. And then when it comes to save, it turns that into whatever that function is expecting and saves it. Does that make sense?
I think so. So you built integration for every core system that you want to be fronting for.
Yes, and that's important to say that this doesn't cover everything yet, but it could if anyone wants. Patch is welcome. Code.
The sheet 2 module?
Yeah.
Code, is that a true module?
Excuse me?
Is that contributed?
It's not a module, but it is on GitHub, and I can't read what I'm typing. Nope. Oh, it is there. It's on sync.io, and if you, I can't see my mouse, but if you go to Playground and then, is that there? Sheets module. Yeah, so you just put in your Google information, and I would encourage you to look at the source code and confirm I'm not stealing your Google information. And then every spreadsheet in Google has a key, and you just put in that key and say if you want to export it to Drupal 8 or Drupal 7. I should also say, I didn't say, there's a sync YAML thing that works the way YAML works in Drupal 8. So if you can export this, and like, yeah, sync is very much, it's hard to keep up with changes in Drupal 8, but I think the Drupal 8 version might not work with the latest version of Drupal 8, or at least some configurations might have changed the way they're stored. But the idea is you can use the same YAML files in Drupal 7 or Drupal 8 and get the same results, which I'm looking forward to when I first need to convert a Drupal 7 site to Drupal 8, because in theory I can just drag those modules over and change the info file and everything will work. That's the goal. Any more questions? Cool. Well, I'll be around if anyone wants to talk more about this stuff.